Rand Water and other such entities are saying that that is in fact fake news. Before we dive into that, just so that our viewers and listeners are aware of the type of work you're involved in, let's just give them a brief introduction. Obviously, Professor Darelle Van Greunen, as Director of the Center for Community Technologies, she, together with a team, developed digital health solutions and ensure that difficult medical concepts and terms are made easy to understand to the everyday person, and very especially the issue that we're going to be unpacking this morning, that is enteric fever or typhoid or whatever else, comes into the scope of what we'll be chatting about this morning. So over to you. And you seem to be based at the hot spot where these problems seem to be playing out. What on earth is going on? Is there cause for concern? Are we talking enteric fever and typhoid? It is one and the same thing, but you're going to unpack that for us.
Thank you, Julie. And yes, until yesterday afternoon, maybe my cause for concern was slightly less than what it is this morning.
Ooh.
So let me first say that typhoid is, just to explain what typhoid is, it is a bacterial infection that can lead to a high fever, diarrhea, vomiting. So very similar symptoms to a number of other diseases, call it that, that's currently doing the round. I mean, we've seen those symptoms occurring in COVID, etc., and of course our ordinary tummy bugs and so forth. But what is important, what separates typhoid from other things, is that it is the bacteria Salmonella typhi, and hence the name typhoid fever. And this is passed through contaminated food and drinking water. And usually you find it in places where hand washing is less frequent, and it spreads through the direct contact with people's feces in an infected person. But of course, we now are faced with a very different situation, and we can unpack that in a little bit more. Maybe just to say that in the last while, we've had an influx of what is termed tummy bugs or gastroenteritis in the Eastern Cape, and specifically in Gqeberha area. So it is difficult at this point in time to say that the figures that we are seeing are actually accurate in terms of the number of cases of typhoid. We are assuming that it is attributed to other issues such as the water quality, but there's no confirmation of that. NICD claimed a few days ago that our water and our municipal water sources are clean and everything else, and that there are no confirmed cases of typhoid linked to the municipal water. However, yesterday afternoon, the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality released a statement saying that the water sources in the metro and the water coming from our taps are no longer fit for human consumption. So you can imagine that, of course, puts a very different spin on matters for the people in
Okay. All right. We obviously we based here in Gauteng, and we too were privy to the communication from NICD suggesting that the water is completely safe, and in fact, in their communication, indicated that this is fake news. This whole issue around typhoid fever or typhoid disease is absolutely fake news, and reassuring us that our tap water is perfectly safe for consumption. You're giving us a different story, but it could be that we here in Gauteng are being serviced by obviously a different municipality. So maybe our situation is slightly different to yours. Also taking into account that your part of the world have been having ongoing problems with water, availability of water, scarcity of water. How does that then impact? And at this point in time, should we in Gauteng and other parts of the country still deem our water safe to use without boiling, and just wait and see what happens?
So let us first just look at the first part of your question. And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. We have been dealing with a number of water issues in the Eastern Cape and then specifically in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, where we've had a very severe drought, as we all know. And yes, NICD did state that the water was safe, but new tests now revealed that our water is certainly not drinkable, and the color of our water has changed.
Ooh.
And to the extent that our municipality issued the statement yesterday, there's a massive outcry in the city, you can imagine, once this news broke, asking for the names of the organizations that tested the water, when was it tested, the results of that. So this is a story developing, you can imagine, with people asking all the difficult questions and some of the answers not necessarily being readily available at the moment. So for us in the Eastern Cape in particular, I would say that we need to now not use water until you have boiled the water, and rather, if you are capable of funding buying bottled water, then rather use bottled water. But of course, we also know that there are large masses of people out there who simply do not have access to the means to buy bottled water. We're talking about the elderly and vulnerable people. So this is a very, very big concern. As far as the rest of the country is concerned, I almost want to say that, as terrible as what it sounds, time will tell whether NICD is correct in what they are saying. One would want to believe that they would have done proper tests and everything else. Of course, it now begs the question, when last were these tests done? And are we 100% sure that all municipal water is safe in the country? We have the opposite situation in other parts of the country, and specifically in the northern parts, where there has been a lot of rain. And as much as no rain can cause trouble, a lot of rain can also cause trouble. So I think that the plea would be to exercise great caution. And if you think that there is a problem, rather be safe than sorry. And boil the water and ensure that you just let it stand for a few minutes before you use it. That is kind of the safe practice that one exercises when you go to countries where typhoid is quite rife. So let us just rather be cautious in our own country as well. Sad, but unfortunately we have to do that.
So the boiling of the water is very definitely the right way to go. We are absolutely safe if we boil the water and consume that water. You also suggested bottled water, but I kind of almost tongue in cheek make the next comment, and that is, in the past we've been told that the water, the bottled water, comes from exactly the same source as your tap water. So I'm wondering, is it safe to then consume the bottled water?
Well, at least the bottled water is put through other processes of cleaning the water before it's bottled. At this point in time, we have very little guarantee as to what happens to the water that comes out of our tap. So I think, and specifically in our environment at the moment here in the Eastern Cape, there's a distinct difference in just the aroma, the smell of the water that comes out of a bottle and that comes out of a tap, and the color thereof. So, if nothing else, at least it puts your mind a little bit at ease when you open the bottled water and there's not a foul smell or a murky color to the water, which is more than what we can say about the water in the tap.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to go for an ad break. When we come back, we'd like to continue this discussion. It's important for our country to go forward in the healthiest possible way, to put in the necessary precautions to be drinking safe water. But then I also want to look at this issue in context with our current COVID pandemic in a minute or two. Please stay with us.
and Lebanese children do not have access to education. Amman means safety and is a school that provides formal education from kindergarten to grade 9. Africa Muslims Agency aims to provide 650 children with education that will change the trajectory of their lives and their families' lives. Fulfill your intention by fulfilling their dreams. Donate 16,000 Rand per child or any amount. Go to africamuslimsagency.co.za or call us on 011 834 8685. Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic Sharia and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
Your act of love gives hope. Islamic Relief supports orphans and vulnerable children in 28 countries with food, education, and medical care. There are more than 150 million orphans in the world. You can give hope to one. Sponsor an orphan today. Go to www.islamic-relief.org.za.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
The time is exactly 18 after 8 o'clock. Welcome back. News and Views with me, Julie Ali, right here on Salam Media. We are discussing a very worrying situation in the country, very especially in the Nelson Mandela Bay area. The issue around contaminated water, and obviously I'm talking with Professor Darelle Van Greunen. She is the professor in the School of ICT at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University. She is the director of Center for Community Technologies, and we have been told by the NICD that the news making the rounds is fake news regarding our water being contaminated, that there is in fact no typhoid outbreak, and we can go about business as normal. Not so, says Professor Darelle Van Greunen, because they have proof in that part of the world, Nelson Mandela Bay, that the water is in fact contaminated by the color and the smell of the water. And I do think that further tests have been carried out. We've been reassured here by Rand Water in Gauteng province. I'm not sure what's happening in KZN and in the Western Cape, but we have been reassured by Rand Water that our water is perfectly safe. But I think after listening to the professor, I am very definitely going to boil my water before consuming. So back to you, Professor, and with a situation like this, with the water being contaminated, how long does it take for us to get back to normal? What needs to happen for the water to be safe enough to drink, apart from us boiling the water and drinking it? That's my first question. And then we need to unpack typhoid or enteric fever, signs and symptoms. How contagious is this condition? So let's go to the first question first.
Well, I think it's quite difficult to say at this point how long it will take for us to get our water back to safety. Our Metro, the municipality, has said that they will announce a plan today. So we will see, based on what is being announced in that plan, what the timescale is for this. Of course, this is not probably an overnight process. I mean, we're talking about the correction of chemical balance, etc., within the water. So until we know what the actual imbalances are, and those results have not been made public, so it's very much under wraps within the Metro and within the municipal rooms of the metro. So until we know exactly what those imbalances are, we are unable to comment on how long it will take to correct it. So I think from that perspective, as citizens, we need to take every precaution that we can to ensure that we stay healthy. And as we've learned in the time of COVID, that there are many non-pharmaceutical interventions as well that one can exercise, and we can return to some of those in a moment. But I think that the first stop at the moment is for us to know what is the extent of the damage, so to speak, to the water that we are having to drink. And until we know that, we can only then speculate on how long it will take to correct that.
I guess the question really is, this is not the first time that South Africa finds itself in this situation. And I guess this scenario does play out around the world from time to time, even in developed countries. And in such situations, do we know how speedily the issue was addressed and resolved? I'm kind of wondering, is it a matter of days, a matter of weeks? In your valued and, in your opinion, I'm sure you have come across these type of scenarios before. What's the sense you get?
So let me say that, yes, it is not an uncommon situation. And given the availability of the correct chemicals and materials to be used, I would imagine that the situation could be corrected in a very short space of time. So I would not imagine this is something that would go on for a month or two. We would imagine a few days, to get the actual balance correct and to put the right chemicals in. But of course, the question begs then, do we have access to the correct chemicals? I know there is also some rumors doing the round that chlorine gas may not be readily available in the country. Now, what is the implication of that? And of course, I cannot verify that at this point in time, but I am aware of some of that doing the rounds.
And obviously, that's a very crucial ingredient or element in the purifying of the water. I'm wondering, and I'm digressing a bit here, is what's happening with the rest of our environment and the ecosystem. If the water is contaminated, what is happening to the fish life and to plant life?
I think that is, again, being a coastal city, of course, that is of great concern to us, where we often see these events rolling over into our environmental health and our oceans economy and the life under the sea. So, of course, whatever happens to the human species also has an impact on our animal species, and of course then the ocean per se. We have many outlets into the ocean and into Nelson Mandela Bay. It being an industrial city, of course, one's mind can get really carried away with what could potentially all go wrong in this area. So I think the sooner this matter is addressed and the necessary experts in terms of environmental health, water health, oceans, environmental testing, etc., is brought on board, the sooner this matter can be addressed and the minds of people be put at ease. Recently, we had a situation here in Nelson Mandela Bay at one of our prime beach areas where there was some sewage leaking onto the beach. It's a prime tourism spot. We just starting to get tourism to be active again. That's not the kind of thing that you would want to see. So the question that immediately comes to my mind is, if you can see a sewage spill onto a prime beach location, where else does it go?
Absolutely, and that puts me off seafood for life. Might I, All right, let's look at the pharmaceutical interventions. What would they be? And cost implications as well. You and I may be able to afford it, but what about other people? What about people in the rural areas, etc.?
So typhoid firstly needs to be diagnosed through a blood sample. So therefore, a blood test needs to be done, and it has to go to a laboratory. So that, of course, puts us in disadvantage number one in the rural areas, because people firstly do not have access to pathology services, and in order to get to a facility that offers pathology services requires travel and money, etc., etc. And then, of course, we're still dealing with COVID and other infectious diseases. I mean, let us not just focus on COVID. There's TB and all of that, and the Eastern Cape being one of the areas that has high prevalence of TB. That is important to note as well. So labs are still inundated with all of those. So there is that, and there is the cost aspect. Of course, it's a very expensive test to test for typhoid. So if you are diagnosed positively with typhoid and the case is, let's say, mild in that sense, at the very least, you would require antibiotics. If it is more severe, you will be hospitalized, because also, let's be under no illusion, typhoid can be fatal. It is accompanied by high temperatures, muscle pains, diarrhea, vomiting, so people dehydrate very easily, severe headaches. There's a whole long list of symptoms. So just listening to that, you can hear that you would require hospitalization. So of course, with that comes a whole different ball game again. And as much as I know that we have an annual occurrence of typhoid in the country, it is of concern that suddenly we have higher numbers than what we've had before. And yes, we know these things do go around in cycles, but there is typhoid. That is the bottom line of it. And we cannot deny the fact, and we need to look at what is causing the rise in numbers and how do we deal with that in a manner that ensures that our population remains safe. So before we hit another pandemic of sorts, let us just rather exercise caution.
Okay, let me ask you this question. I think it's very important to understand. If a family member has come down with typhoid, if we don't go for the blood test, how will we be able to distinguish it from other conditions like COVID-19, for example? How do you treat it? And how contagious is it? I may have a typhoid. Do I then pass it on to the rest of my family? Or is it through the drinking of contaminated water? If they don't consume that water, are they then pretty safe?
So let's just first look at the difference between typhoid and an ordinary tummy bug. So typhoid is caused by a bacterial infection, and your typical symptoms, as I said, headache, lethargy, fatigue, nausea, abdominal pain as well, diarrhea or constipation. It could be either way. So the typical gastro, let's call it gastro, the term that we are all familiar with, or tummy bug, symptoms include usually a watery diarrhea, stomach cramps, nausea, and sometimes a low-grade fever. So I think just to separate those two, that how do you know whether you have typhoid or how do you know whether you have COVID? I think the separating factor there is the prevalence probably of fever and a very high fever. When you have typhoid, you run a very high temperature. So that is very, very important to note. So I think from that perspective, that is how we can separate those two. What to do if someone in the house is exhibiting those kinds of symptoms, I would say isolate that person in the house. It is very important to ensure that you do not touch anything that this person has been in contact with. So treat it like you would a contaminated area, because the contamination can be carried forward in feces, but there's also the possibility even of saliva or something like that. So ensure that you wear gloves, and we've become very accustomed to the non-pharmaceutical interventions of masks and gloves and things like that. So continue to practice those and ensure that you keep a distance from that person, keep their cutlery, their whatever separate. Treat it like you would also a person who has hepatitis, where we isolate anything that the person has touched to ensure there's not further contamination. In terms of the water, I would, if a person contracts typhoid in your house, obviously their big concern would be water. It could also have been contaminated food, or then even food that was washed elsewhere. We often wash our vegetables and things. So if you have vegetables that you did not wash in your house, then I would suggest that you rewash all vegetables. Please do not just trust the source where they were washed, and make sure that you use boiled water to do that. And then, of course, the basic, hygiene of washing hands frequently, and we should still be doing that in the time of COVID as well. And just basic good hygiene after using a bathroom, or changing the diapers of children or so. So before, during, after preparing food, to make sure that you wash your hands, soap and water, as we've done with COVID. The same applies here. And then at least you know that you can safeguard yourself.
Professor Darelle Van Greunen, thank you indeed for the insights, and we pray that things get sorted out in Nelson Mandela Bay, and also that we are still safe here in Gauteng and other provinces in South Africa. Thank you indeed for your insights. Go well. Until the next time, as always, God bless.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
That was Professor Darelle Van Greunen, professor in the School of ICT at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, also director of a Center for Community Technologies. It is 8:34 exactly, news and views with me right here on Salam Media. In a minute or two, we're going to be joined by Tebisa Ibrahim Fakude, and we're going to be looking at the situation obviously in the Ukraine. So do stay with us.